no, call him Octo Eyeball Jellybug. Let's just call him Justin.
What's up, folks? This is Justin from Books, Bricks, and Boards, and today I'm back to my regularly scheduled programming. I'm going to talk today about Palladium. Now, I know that Palladium is a love it or hate it kind of company and game system. I know that it has a reputation for being not particularly well edited, and a lot of folks think it's incredibly clunky. But there's also an extremely dedicated fan base that has kept the same game system with very little changes in circulation and in print for over 40 years now. So what is it about Palladium that is good, what's bad, and just what is it? So today I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of Palladium and whether you might be interested in trying it with your group and how exactly you get into the Megaverse. Let's get into it.
Hey Justin, this ends now.
My introduction to Palladium games came from an unusual source. You see, where I grew up, there really wasn't much in the way of a hobby store. Walden Books was the best bet that I had. So as a kid, I had either D&D or nothing. So my first time even seeing a Palladium book was the original Rifts book when I was at my cousin's house in the Chicago suburbs. Now, as much as that was interesting to me, I really didn't know what it was all about, and I didn't have too much interest because I knew I was never going to have that game. But fast forward a few years later, and my mom came home from a garage sale with this book, as well as Ninjas and Super Spies. Now, this book actually came out before the Ninja Turtles that, if you grew up in the 80s, you saw on Saturday morning cartoons, and it is based upon the original Eastman and Laird comic books. So the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness RPG was an opportunity to create anthropomorphic animals and play in a modern world, which I had not gotten a chance to yet. I wasn't exposed to Call of Cthulhu or any of the games that would have been more modern, other than I did later play the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game when I was a kid. But this was my first Palladium book, and it introduced me to the Megaverse system. I remember as a child creating characters for hours on end, using all the BioE to try to create the most powerful possible character, along with my friend Ben. So we did this for a couple of years, and at that point, we got back into playing 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons, and I let my Palladium books fall by the wayside until much later. But Palladium was much more than just Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It had expansions for the Turtles. As I said, it had Ninjas and Super Spies, which I got at the same time. It had Rifts, which my cousin had introduced me to. Later, that became Rifts Chaos Earth, which was a prequel to Rifts. They had their own fantasy game, which was actually the original Palladium game and the origination of the Palladium rule system, which is used in all their games to some degree. There's Nightbane, which allows you to kind of play the World of Darkness creatures, the vampires, the werewolves, and whatnot. Beyond the Supernatural, you could play the X-Files before the X-Files were a thing. They had their own Heroes game, which was actually, I believe, the longest in-print superheroes game. Maybe Champions might be longer. I don't know if it's still in print or not, but this is certainly one of the longest running Heroes games. And there's even a sequel to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles without the license called After the Bomb. So Palladium has a lot going for it. They cover a lot of genres. They have post-apocalyptic, they have superheroes, they have horror, they have the opposite side of horror where you're playing the beasts. They have fantasy. They have the kitchen sink campaigns of Rifts that cover a little bit of everything. They have spies and martial arts. And they have anthropomorphic animals.
Ha! Take that, Justin!
But what are the specific things about the Palladium system that people love and hate that create such strong reactions to it? That's what I'm going to get into right now. My 5 pros and 5 cons to the Palladium universe, the Megaverse system. First up, compatibility. I can learn one system and be able to play all of the different genres that I showed you just a moment ago. I can play horror through Beyond the Supernatural. I can play supers with Heroes Unlimited. I can play turtles with After the Bomb or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness. I can do a kitchen sink campaign with Rifts. I can play Palladium Fantasy and play a high fantasy or low fantasy version of that. The point is, I can play all of the genres that really drive the RPG industry with one system. I learned the combat system from one, and I've got it down pat. The negative side to that is that the system is a little bit dated. It really shows its age. It was created in the early 80s, and as a result, it has a little bit of clunkiness to it. Now, for somebody that is used to and brought up in a AD&D first edition or second edition background, that's not going to be as much of a turnoff as it would be to a modern gamer who's only played 5th edition or Powered by the Apocalypse games. But that still is worth mentioning as a potential con. Now for my second pro, the genres it covers. Like I said, with one rule set, I can play in pretty much any genre that I want. My players, if I want to switch from a horror game to a fantasy game, they don't have to worry about learning an entirely new set of rules. This is often what prevents groups from trying new systems, or new genres rather, because they don't want to have to deal with the learning upfront cost to their time, and they don't want to invest in a whole bunch of new books for a system that might only get played a couple of times. Once they buy one Palladium book, they pretty much have all of the rules that they need to know as far as how the system works. Sure, there's some extra magic rules in fantasy, there's some extra psionics that aren't in all of the books in Rifts. There's some technology things that change between editions. The firearm rules get jostled a little bit here and there between Heroes Unlimited and Rifts or Ninjas and Super Spies. But you get the gist of the system and can play quite easily just by knowing one system. So it reduces the overhead that comes along with usually switching genres. Now the downside. The con is that system that allows you to switch those genres is a little bit slower and more procedural. Specifically, whenever you are playing a combat out, you're going to have the attack roll, and then the defender can either dodge, parry, or entangle. So they have a choice to make. There's 2 rolls where there would be 1 in most systems. Then if that fails, then if it's a bludgeoning attack or an explosive attack or fall damage, the defender also gets a chance to roll with the punch to reduce that to half. Again, another step in the process. So that slows down the combat a little bit, even if there are some benefits to that I will get into later. Now for my third pro, affordability. These books are actually incredibly affordable still today. You can get a hardback copy of Riffs or any of the other books for around $30 if you look online. Now, on top of that, if you pay full sticker price and you get it through Palladium Books themselves, Kevin Simbita, the owner, will actually sign them right now. I don't know if he does that on all of them, but the hardbacks that I've bought directly from Palladium, he has signed each of them, and he puts a nice note in there that is relevant to the game system. For example, after the bomb, he wrote, "Be an animal." So you can have one of each of the core rule books for less than what it would cost you to get into a lot of RPGs by the time you bought all of the books that you would need. Now back to a con. My third con is balance. If you're worried about game balance and you want everybody to have the same impact on the game in every aspect of the game, if you want their combat powers to be equivalent to one another, none of the Palladium games are going to be for you. They don't even pretend to have balance, and that's okay, because life's not really balanced. So they're not trying to simulate chess, they're trying to simulate an 80s action movie. So if you're wanting balance, Palladium's not going to be your bag. But the flip side of that, like I said, this feels like an 80s action movie. In D&D, the attacker makes his roll, sees if he hits, and does his damage. The defender seems a little bit detached from that. I mean, sure, you make choices that will aid your AC, but you're not actively choosing in that moment how you're defending the attack, and you're not rolling against his attack. That's different in Palladium. You're choosing. You can parry his attack or dodge. You can also entangle his weapon potentially. There's lots of choices that go into that, and it makes the combat flow more naturally. Also, the impact of having a greater martial skill shows up a lot more readily in the Palladium systems, because a lot of times certain characters will have more attacks than others. And so a character might have 5 attacks or 6 attacks in a round in Palladium. And if you're fighting somebody that only has 2, that means you're going to be having a lot of unanswered attacks. So it just feels much more, like I said, like an 80s action movie. Now back to my cons. My fourth con is the sheer size and scope of the available content. I kind of showed you at the beginning a stack of some of my books for Palladium. I have many more. And if you're just getting started and you don't know where to start, it can be quite daunting. Even just this book by itself, Riffs, this is the Ultimate Edition. There are so many different options within this world. You've got the Adventure Guide, you've got the Bestiary, you've got the Game Master's Guide, you've got, 20-some world books, you've got different campaign books, you've got source books. There's a lot, and you don't know what is necessary or recommended and what's just optional. Now the good news is some of the lines don't have as much, so you can kind of start in something that is a little bit less daunting if you wanted to. Or you could start with a genre that you're more familiar with and kind of figure out what you need in that genre. For example, fantasy, you're going to need the core book, and you're going to need the bestiary. That's about it. As long as you're an experienced GM, you're going to be able to figure out where to go from there. If you're going to get into heroes, you get the Heroes Unlimited book and maybe the Game Master's Guide and maybe Villains Unlimited, and you're probably good to go there. Now there's a lot more books available, and I've got a lot of them, and they're great, but that's a good starting point. With Riffs, this and the Bestiary is probably the starting point. With After the Bomb, you're probably just going to buy the After the Bomb core rulebook. There are some very inexpensive resources for that. Roadhogs was one that I showed in my initial part of the video, and that would be a good starting point there. But as I said, there's a lot of choices here, and because of that, it can be a little bit overwhelming to get started. And here's my last pro, and that is choice. It's feeding right into my previous con. So while it's a little bit daunting to get started in the Palladium Megaverse, once you dive in, you are spoiled for choice. There are hundreds of books, and with minimal effort, you can interchangeably use pretty much anything within them once you understand the system well. So you're going to have the opportunity to draw upon a library of tomes that is enormous and will offer you the ability to do pretty much anything that you can imagine with the system. Now, for my last con. Some of the games that are billed as complete game systems aren't as complete as you might hope right out of the box. Beyond the Supernatural 2nd edition is a good example. It doesn't have the rules for magic or for psychics in the main book. Matter of fact, at the time of this video, I don't think the rules for psychics are released yet. It kind of relies upon that in a lot of its writing. Even some of the monsters in the book have magical spells, which, unless you have some other Palladium books, you can't really use right out of the box. But that being said, not all of the books are incomplete out of the box. I would say as far as books that are going to require other books, you're probably going to want more than just this book if you're going to play Rifts, just because the setting is so enormous. You're going to want to get something to use as a setting book to give you a little bit of a sandbox to play in rather than just diving into the whole world right at once. Beyond the Supernatural, like I said, also probably a little bit incomplete out of the box. After the Bomb is the most complete out of the box, and I would probably say Ninjas and Super Spies next, and then Heroes Unlimited after that. But if you're looking for a starting point that I would call a complete system, and you're okay with just playing anthropomorphic animals, After the Bomb is a great starting point. It's also written a little bit later than some of the others, so the rules are a little bit more well edited and concise. The examples are good too. So is the Megaverse right for you and your game group? Well, that's going to depend. Are you comfortable with a little clunkiness? Do you like the old school aesthetic? Are you okay making some of this stuff up on your own or ruling on the fly? If those things are all true of you and your group, it might be for you. If you like unusual and interesting settings, you enjoy old style line art and a multitude of options, then there's a good chance that this system may be for you and your group. If you played any of these games and you're still watching this video, then I know the Megaverse is definitely for you. Do yourself and your group a favor. Give this a try. If you give it an honest go and you come into it with an open mind, I think that you'll find that a lot of the criticisms of the Palladium Megaverse are a little bit unfair, and a lot of the praise has been unfairly left out of the commentary. So, until next time, this has been Justin from Books, Bricks, and Boards. Good gaming, and God bless.